times when Mike was trying to commit suicide. He was mutilating, he was violent, destroying things. He was totally out of control.
I'm Steve Opry. If you're a parent with teenagers at home, you know how challenging it can be to cope with the normal struggles that all young people go through. But what if your teenager also had a serious mental illness? Coming up, we'll learn how some families are coping as we explore the topic, parenting a mentally ill teen.
Holly Dewey is a single mom with 3 teenagers. 2 of them are struggling with mental disorders.
I have a almost 19-year-old daughter who was born with hydrocephalus, and it was not discovered right away. So she suffered some brain damage from that. The doctors kind of attributed a lot of her behavior, her differences in behavior, to the brain damage.
By age 14, Holly's daughter Tanya began to have hallucinations that would later be diagnosed as symptoms of schizophrenia.
One day she came in, she was outside kind of evening hours, and had said she thought she saw a spaceship in the sky. You could see a panic in her eyes and was really scared about it. And then she started explaining it more and said the voices in the spaceship were calling her, and she kept wanting to go out the door. And so these voices kept calling her to come to her. I tried to explain to her that I didn't hear anything and I didn't see anything, but you could just see that in her mind it was real.
Well, I know for me that when I'm hallucinating in voices, I feel like I have no control over what my mind does. There's nothing anybody can say to control this or help me.
Currently, she's taking Zyprexa or olanzapine, and it has taken the voices away completely, for periods of time. She also takes Serzone because she gets, and that's for depression.
Dr. Keith Olson is a Christian psychotherapist who often counsels teens struggling with mental disorders.
One of the hardest things is that when parents find out that their teenager does have some kind of mental illness, some kind of emotional problem, probably the first question is, where did we go wrong? What could we have done to prevent it? And I think that's an important question. We need to take a look at it. We need to search it out to see what can we do differently in the future. And we learn that primarily from asking, what did I do wrong? And yet we need to understand as parents that a lot more impacts our kids than just our parenting. Some of the disorders seem to be very heavily related with a genetic, inherited kind of aspect to that, to the cause. Schizophrenia, depression are 2 of those. But even there, we don't find that it's the same in every case. So it's really up to grabs. We don't know.
Holly's 13-year-old son Ryan has also been struggling with mental disorders for years.
He's had several diagnoses. Because he's not 18 yet, it's difficult to actually have a firm diagnosis. He suffers from bipolar, conduct disorder, and has real severe depression where he wants to kill himself. He had several episodes of very violent behavior towards other people, towards animals. His language was real inappropriate. And again, I was dealing with children's outpatient psychiatry. They had tried different medications, and then he got to actually a manic phase where he wasn't sleeping and just was not thinking at all about what he was doing, and got extremely violent. And I recall actually trying to calm him down and kind of putting my knees and my hands on him to hold him down, and he was still able to physically outpower me.
When I do these things, I don't think before, and afterwards I think what I do, and I'm all sad about what I did, and I try to apologize to the people who I do.
He's been on all different kinds of medication. Currently, he is on clonidine, which kind of helps keep him calm. He's on Risperdal, which helps with the aggressiveness, and recently was started on Prozac. because he goes into deep depressions, and he doesn't care about living. Probably one of the biggest challenges is facing the fact that they're not like other kids their age. You know, every morning they have their medication. It's very important that their medication be taken the right amount at the right time. You kind of have to oversee everything that's going on.
Holly's 16-year-old daughter, Tiffany, is not afflicted with a mental illness, but her life has been affected by the struggles of her brother and sister.
A lot of times I think that they're getting more attention than I do, but I understand that they need it, and that's, you know, my mom needs to give it to them, and it's very important for them. And I've kind of learned to, you know, just accept that, you know, and I'll go talk to somebody else if I need to talk, or I'll just go do something else and just wait. You know, a lot of times, like, I keep my mom up until like midnight just talking and talking and talking, and like I'll look over and she's finally asleep.
Often, so much attention from the parents has to be given to the children with mental illness just to contain them, just to keep them in the home, just to keep chaos and disaster from happening on a daily basis, that the kid who's kind of balanced, who's pretty well put together, becomes a part of either helping the family almost as another parent, and this is particularly true in a single-parent family, that the single parent absolutely needs the help of the other child. Or they recede into the background and they kind of get lost.
A lot of times I have to stay home and do stuff like, you know, watch my brother, watch my sister, and, you know, my sister's older than me and my brother's plenty old enough to, you know, watch himself, but it's like, you have to just stay home and make sure everything's okay, and it's like, everybody else is, come on, let's go to the movies, let's go here, and it's like, I'm staying home to watch my sister right now. And I know that makes her feel really bad and stuff, but I think it's really important that, you know, you stick around and you help out.
When a parent has a child who has a problem of a mental disorder nature, they are going to run into some kind of negative comments of, well, you should have disciplined better, you know, you weren't spiritual enough, you were overly spiritual, you were this or you were that, and there will be a negative bias.
People look at the kids and think, oh, they're perfectly normal kids, and they have expectations of them to behave a certain way, and then they do something that other people react to and think, you know, that they need more discipline, or what a terrible parent, or something like that.
The kids don't understand how much it hurts to me because the teachers don't either, because they don't see it and they don't know.
I'm always afraid that if my friends find out that I'm hearing voices or hallucinating, that I'll lose friends, and I don't communicate well because I always get nervous about it.
It's like every day, you never know what to expect. You just get up in the morning, you don't know if they're having a good day or a bad day, and you really always have to, it seems like you're the one that always has to stay strong.
Because of the higher risk of suicide in the teen population, parents should be especially concerned if their teenager shows any signs of a mental illness.
I work a lot with teenagers, and I find teenagers are much more at risk for suicide for some really clear reasons. Once we enumerate them, they're pretty understandable. Number one, they haven't lived life very long. They've got maybe 13 years of life or even 17 years of life. At a given moment, they may feel absolutely lousy, hopeless. They may feel horrible inside, and they're thinking, if life is like this, why do I want it? They haven't lived enough years of life like we as adults have to realize that we come through those periods of time. We get out of them and life does get better. Another issue is because of puberty and the after effects of puberty, the emotional swings, the adjustments that they're making both physically and socially and emotionally. They are ill-equipped to deal with important decision making. They tend to be more impulsive. They are more apt to make a life-threatening or life-changing decision at a moment's notice.
Richard and Elaine Stangler have had to cope with suicide attempts by their 15-year-old son, Mike.
We had been looking to adopt a child since probably 1989. And when they introduced Michael to us, he was about 6.5. The first time that I know of that Mike had actually tried to commit suicide was he was He had just turned 8. I was standing in front of the house. I was standing at the door of the house. I was looking out, and Mike jumped out in front of a truck. I just didn't know what to do anymore. He had been thrown out of school, suspended, you know, all these different things, and it was just, I didn't know what else to do. So I packed him up and I took him to the hospital. And it's a sad thing when you've got an 8-year-old kid that's trying to end his life. What could be so bad that a young kid like this would want to do that? There have been times since then that Mike has shown suicidal type tendencies. These are the hardest things for us to deal with, that and self-mutilation. Because it's just hard to realize and think, God, he's just a kid. He's this young kid that didn't have a chance in life. We gave him a chance, and you think that we're gonna, you know, we're perfect, love will do this. There's a lot more to adopting an older child than just loving him.
The Stanglers eventually learned that Mike had been neglected and abused in his birth home and several foster homes before his adoption.
The first 8 months of a child's life is very important for bonding, and Mike didn't receive that. So consequently, he has what is called reactive attachment disorder.
When I feel sad, I either start to mutilate myself, or I'll go smoke a cigarette and try to get caught, or I'll go and do bad stuff.
In a way, it's easy to understand where some of his problems were coming from, and we just couldn't fill that void. And those are things that, you know, we've tried to help him deal with and accept that, you know, you can't replace them, they're gone forever.
All the time, my parents will stick by me, support me, what I do. They let me have my dog, which was incredibly good.
It was really hard for a while there. There were times when Mike was trying to commit suicide. He was mutilating. He was violent, destroying things, and he was totally out of control. And I don't think that he had any of this control that everybody wanted him to have.
The Stanglers have taken it upon themselves to become educated about the mental health system for young people. Elaine's continued interest has led her to become a regional coordinator of United Advocates for Children of California.
I went to a parenting class where Michael was going to school at the time. And when I walked in, there was this woman sitting next to me, and she was sobbing really, really bad. And her problem was that she couldn't get her kid to eat his peas. And that day, Michael had eaten a pair of shoes. So, you know, I didn't belong in there at all.
It was difficult at first to find people that had similar experiences. We've learned that there are things available for families with children like Mike. There's respite care, there's support groups, you know. And of course, there's always, you know, like worst case scenarios, residential treatment and hospitalization, but facilities are there, and it's basically growing because even society as a whole, you know, they used to ignore the things, you know, ignore problems like, well, you can't have these problems with a child, and they're learning that, yes, you can.
Experts say that parents of a mentally ill teenager shouldn't try to meet all the challenges on their own.
We need to go to people who we know do understand and will support us. Our pastor, a counselor, a support group, people that really understand what's going on. Sometimes people who've gone through it themselves.
There's a Alliance for the Mentally Ill support group, which is a room full of people that talk about what it's like to have a relative or a friend or somebody who's mentally ill. And that's where you talk about things and you don't have to explain it, and people know exactly what it is you're talking about. Research it, find out all that you can about it, and there are ways to help them deal with their really bad times, but you have to seek help. You have to go out there and you have to ask questions, and most important is to love them.
One of the myths about parenting teenagers is that parents don't matter, and that somehow parents have lost not only control but influence, and that kids only care about what their friends think, and it's absolutely not true. What parents think and what parents feel and the attitude that is displayed from the parent to the child is tremendously meaningful to the teenager, even the very rebellious, angry or depressed or suicidal teenager.
Reactive attachment disorder is a tough disorder, but it's not an impossible one to deal with. And I strongly believe that Michael has bonded to us a lot because I think maybe he knew that after a while we're not going to give up on him.
Hope is such a precious commodity with any of us when we're trying to come through a difficult time, whether it's suicidality, whether it's depression, whether it's a severe bout with some other kind of mental or stress situation. And when kids can get the sense that their mom and dad really trust them to be okay and has hope that they are going to make it. And I don't mean the kind of hope that says, oh, I hope somehow. But I mean that really solid hope, the kind of hope that we have in Jesus Christ, the kind of hope that says we hope this because we know it's secure. And the more the kids can feel that from their parents, it empowers them to make it and to recover.
I guess what's probably most important for me is that they accept who they are and that they like who they are. And that they educate the world so that someday they don't have to feel that they're so different, so that the world recognizes them. They're incredibly intelligent and have their own things to offer, and if the world would accept them, then they could do whatever they wanted to do.
I don't think we ought to talk about total cure. I think we ought to talk about how do we help our teenagers become all that they can be. How do we help them to utilize their strengths to their best benefit in a way that makes their weaknesses, their traits that will tend to get them into trouble, less problematic for them?
One of the things I try and tell my kids is that God made you like you are. They go through a lot of, why did God do this? And I say, you're a special person, and God made you just like you are for some purpose.
When I are in my rages, I don't want to live, and it's like I don't care about what I do to myself or to anyone else. And when I'm in the rage, I may be a Christian, but then I just don't care if I go to hell or where. But sometimes afterwards I pray and ask God to forgive me and what I did to my families, and make my family forgive me.
Teenagers who are depressed, who are experiencing emotional problems, can become very folded in on themselves and very self-focused. And a healthy faith experience can help them to orient themselves to a much broader part of the world. That in itself can be healing.
There's a part in the Bible, and I don't know exactly where, but it says that God looks special upon those children who need him. And I think he's like blessing my brother and sister more than anybody else in the world because they need it so much more.
In the same way that God loves us and develops us in who we are, that's our task as parents. And to release whatever sense of disappointment and shame or sense of ownership in that way that we have over our children. And to just help them to develop the characteristics that make them very, very special.
I can't blame God for Michael. I can blame a lot of people in his past for some of his problems, but it's certainly, God is, maybe God made him, or if God did make him the way he is, he made him so that we would take him in and love him, and we would have a family. There's a bright side to everything.
Clearly, parenting a teenager who is mentally ill can be very difficult and frustrating at times. But God doesn't expect us to do it on our own. God wants us to rely on him for the strength to do what's right for our children.